again, and also just give some housekeeping for our parents that have joined us for the second session. So we did just want to note for any online attendees to please just pop any questions or comments that you've got in the chat so we can pose it to you, Luke, after the session. And we also just wanted to remind everybody that we are recording both sessions for parents who weren't able to make it this evening, either in person or online. So with that, I'm going to reintroduce Luke for those parents who haven't heard about our guest speaker for this evening. Luke has actually when I heard this earlier, it makes you feel very old, but it just means that you're more experienced, and like a good wine, Luke. You've got about 3 decades of experience.
Spoils at some point.
Not yet, not yet. I've still got a grandchild to keep energetic for. Luke has around 3 decades of experience working in the non-profit and child protection sector and works with children in conflict with the law, children with autism, children with behavioural challenges, and psychiatric diagnoses, as well as children in mainstream schooling. He's an expert consultant on child protection and development, sexual abuse, and toxic masculinity. Luke has in-depth understanding and special interest in the child and teenage brain and is currently completing his MSc in neurodevelopment at WITS within the Department of Pediatrics and Pathology. Luke is also a regular face and voice in the media, and most importantly, and probably your proudest achievement, is being a husband and being a father to your 2 daughters and also soon a grandfather. So with that, Luke, welcome again for the second time this evening, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts and your wisdom on the issue of parental guidance, not parent gone, as we shine the spotlight on the age of consent, expressed consent, intoxication, and the diminished capacity and the role and responsibilities of parents in this space. So thank you for joining us, and Luke, thank you again.
All right, good evening, folks. So the way I've approached this talk, so some of you are seeing me now for the first hour, others of you are stuck with me for another hour. So there's going to be sort of tiny bits of repetition at the beginning. But the way I approached this, again, was sort of from the perspective of child development and recognizing that us as parents develop with our children. How many of you remember your first child when it was born? How many of you remember if your child had a dummy? What did you do when the dummy fell out of your child's mouth? Milton's, boiling it, microwave. Remember your second child? Those of you with the third child, remember the third child? Something to the third child, it's in the wine. So there's a level at which we as parents mitigate risks to our children all the time, okay? So when you felt pregnant with your first child, you stopped your evening wine. If you smoked, you stopped smoking. You suddenly stopped eating fish because there's mercury in the water and all such things. Okay, so you recognize that you need to mitigate the risks for children's development because your womb and when the child's in what they call the 4th trimester, so those next 3 months after the child is born, recognize there's massive risk to children. We need to recognize again that brain and the brain of the teenager are very similar because of the pruning, and there's big risks to teenagers. They're just bigger. They use different dummies like vapes and alcohol, etc., etc. And we need to equally protect them because their brains are equally fragile. Okay, so that's the context of the talk. So next one. So how's life? If I ask you how are things at the moment in the world? Hectic. Huh? It's about right. Now, if I asked you, is that your hand waving or drowning? Who would say that while raising your children, you feel like you're waving? Drowning? Okay. And then some didn't even put their hands up because they thought it's like depending on the day. Now, what I always remember being a young person or being a teenager is that I was unplayable as a teenager. And not because I set out to be, okay, it's just because something happened. And I had like a perpetual existential angst. Okay, it was like the world is like hectic. How many of you remember your first boyfriend and girlfriend? And if you're with your partner, pretend it's them. How many of you remember losing your first love? You took out your vinyls, made playlists, played sad songs, wrote dark poetry, did portraits of how your world is crumbling. And according to the movies, had lots of ice cream, etc. And that's the beauty of the teenage brain. There's a level of emotional spark to it that I wish we wouldn't dampen. And I wish we wouldn't lose when we become adults. It's a beautiful thing, okay? But like with anything that has a spark, you add something to the spark, it's an explosion. Okay, next one. So this is where I work. Now, the reason I've put this up is that you've asked me, well, the school has asked me to talk about risks to children. If I showed you that, what are your associations with that? Street children, suicide, dead bodies, drugs, prostitution, dangerous people, the kids say dodgy, etc. Now, that's the environment these children grow up in. Do any of you ever think of healthy children exiting that way? And that's the funny thing, is there's a level at which the risks our children face are a very complex thing to navigate. Because teenagers, myself included, we were told you learn from your mistakes. So I thought, well, let me make as many as I possibly can so that I can be very clever by the time I reach adulthood. Okay? They want to experience it for themselves. It's something they want to learn on their own. But we have to mitigate that the mistakes they make don't change the entire trajectory of their lives. So there are certain mistakes you make that coming back from them are just either very complicated or impossible. Okay, and I'll explain what those are. But that having been said, I have many young people who exit this system, which is where I work on a daily basis, who exit as very healthy young people and who do very well. That's because of a concept we call resistance as opposed to resilience. So when you talk about risk mitigation in children, I see all children's what we call bad behavior, in the previous talk, unlucky behavior. I see it as a form of service delivery protest. It's like they're burning tires in my street. Because they say, this world you handed me is you've given me bad chicken to eat. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of regurgitating it back to you and saying to you, you better help me kind of digest this because this world is undigestible. So that protest, I enjoy the protest. The children who withdraw, run away, become addicted, those children I battle with because it's like they've gone missing. I've lost them. The children who fight me, I enjoy because they've got that spark, that there's something they haven't lost. They're protesting. They've still got that emotional spark. They haven't resigned to the world. Now, what's the difference in risk mitigation between resilience and resistance? My psychology colleagues wrote a scathing article about this opinion, about me, about my opinion. And I said, I don't believe in resilience because you can't say I can drop a child on their head and they bounce back. You know, and we talk about building resilience skills, etc. Resilience skills are fine if you have a basic, go back to the previous talk on Maslow, if you have a basic grounding from which to come back from. The children that I work with, they resist the world as it's handed to them. It's an activity of resistance. And we need to prize and build it. If you look at the 1976 riots, okay, that changed the country because there was a protest against learning Afrikaans. It changed the trajectory of the political world. Children lost their lives to it. That's how strongly teenagers feel about things, and it's a beautiful thing, okay, provided we assist them in directing it. Okay, next slide. So what do I do? So in order to mitigate the risks to children, I create a balance. So the first thing is food. You will not believe the problems we are having with food at the moment. Okay, food has become an absolute drama. Okay, why? So junk food has become a big problem. Okay, so I think that the Americans, when they did like McDonald's and all of those places, I think the original concept of a weapon of mass destruction of our society is that food. Okay, and I'm telling you, it's and the problem is they know what stressed poor people crave. They crave high fat, high sugar, high salt. Okay, why else has it become a problem for me? And I'll explain why food is so important shortly. Think I'm mental at the moment. Yeah. Yeah. Other issues with food?
What's in it?
What's in it? The stuff in our food at the moment is like mind-blowing. If you look at a simple thing like the exponential increase in ASD, autistic spectrum disorder, you cannot explain it other than there's something environmental or something in some kind of food or eating. They're talking about androgen blockers in the food because it's mainly a boy-based thing and it's blocking certain male hormones, etc., etc. So what's in it? The sort of mass production. And for the girls, think about the girls. Weight. Disordered eating. Not eating disorders, but disordered eating. So they have diagnosed, named, whatever you want to call it, a new eating disorder based purely on the influences online. Does anyone know what it's called? Called orthorexia. Okay. Now, what is orthorexia? Orthorexia is a complex thing. Orthorexia is, I don't know how many of you follow any influencers on the tube, but influencers are called influencers for a reason. They influence people. Okay. So you've got this influencer with the size zero body, living the life, going green juice in the morning, green juice, have a green juice, go out to my palm tree, stand on my head on the beach, go back, put a bit of makeup on, go back, stand on my head, have another green juice. Okay. It's become this obsession with clean eating. Okay. And it's like juicy this and juicy that and whatever. Our children haven't even grown into the bodies they will one day live in. And they're playing with the nutrient content. Okay, that's a big problem. Which of your organs takes up the most energy in terms of energy expenditure in your body? Second is your brain. It's the second. Your liver. So your liver is a very big sort of filter of all kinds of, then your brain. Now, if you're not getting proper nutrients, your brain is. Now, we talk about children having issues. I mean, we've seen children having seizures, not eating properly. They want to look a certain way when they have the photo shoots and they don't understand that those guys boys are getting it as well, on the men's health cover, they've dehydrated themselves for, I mean, they've lost about 7 kilograms to get into that shape. And then they've been airbrushed. You know what I mean? So there's this complete falsehood around it. And because these young people haven't grown into the body that they will live in, I'm saying to them, you need to be healthy, but you must understand that you need to be, the job of adolescence is to be okay enough with who you are now while you're working out become at some level. Okay, so we need to understand food. Food is part of the gut-brain axis. Food affects the way we feel. How many of you eat more when you are upset, or sad, or depressed, whatever? How many of you eat less? Okay, how many of you sleep more? How many of you sleep less? So it's a chemical thing. Okay, and I know myself when I'm stressed and upset, I don't eat and I don't sleep. And those are two very bad things. Okay, because it's very bad for me. I need to do both. Okay, so sleep is the other one. Okay, it's the ability to rest and digest. So sleep hygiene is incredibly important. And what's happening is that what is Netflix's greatest competition? Sleep. Not Prime and it's not Disney, it's sleep. Because you've got to binge them and you've got to watch, and then and wake up in the night and watch, whatever. And the children will tell you, yeah, but I can't sleep unless I go to sleep with the what, you know what I'm saying? I need it as my alarm. Yeah. But the problem is there's blue light in it. That blue light, even if you put the filters on, the closer it is to your face, it wakes you up. Also, everything online is stimulating. So you've got to be careful of that kind of thing. And again, it's about children trying to pacify themselves rather than learning and practicing sleep. Remember, sleep is a cyclical thing of about 90 minutes. And as you get older, you wake up every 90 minutes as it becomes cyclical. Okay. So the importance of sleep in the teenage brain is twofold. One, well, in all brains, but in the teenage brain, the one is it solidifies memory. So it helps you solidify memory. And the other thing is it sweeps out what you don't need. So sleep is important. Very simple system. Then we talk about fitness. How many of you enjoy moving? I mean, just in general. Okay. Now, do you feel better after you move? Are any of you runners? Are there any runners in the audience? Okay. So, you know the runner's high that you get when you run far. Okay. I mean, I get it all. One of my best things, I hate running. But I run every Saturday because I run with the kids at the gym, and I love it because I do tours of the city on my legs, running tours of the city. I absolutely love it. But that runner's high, which I'm going to get to, which is a very important conversation we need to have, that runner's high they're starting to discover is not actually based on the cascade of endorphins. It's actually based on the endocannabinoid system and the release of what they call anandamides, which are the key tools or the key lock system where that THC connects to. So there's a whole story about cannabis, which is feeding that same system, okay? And it's a shortcut to that system, and it's short-circuiting that system. So fitness improves mood and memory. Children must move. It is a very simple thing. The occupation and the language of childhood is play. Sitting behind a desk all day is not good for children. It's not what they're designed to do. Plus, it doesn't have to be structured play and educational toys and whatever. The educational toy is a block of wood and you. You know what I mean? Who's the enlightened witness with the child. And then the most important one, which is the purpose of today's talk, is what we call functional feelings. I'm very distressed and sad by the fact that I ask young people how many of you are stressed, and the vast majority of them put their hands up. That should not be. Stress is extremely bad for your body. It releases a set of very ugly chemicals. Those chemicals cause inflammation. That inflammation causes illness. That's a bad thing. Stress is a bad thing. It causes cancers. It causes all kinds of things. So you've got eustress, distress, and what they call toxic stress. And toxic stress is the worst of the worst. But what we want is we want to assist children to recognize their feelings and to be able to regulate those feelings. So in other words, as the world comes into them through their five senses, they make sense of that world in the regulatory system, which is your nervous system, your brain, your endocrine system, your endocannabinoid system, all of those other things. And what happens is out comes behavior. And we want the behavior to be congruent with the input. That's really what we want to do. So it's like we don't want to put a 12 volt into a 230 volt thing up, because our children go to all the time. It's not helpful to any of us. So we want them to recognize their feelings. We want them to be functional. So what I do is I don't ask children what they feel ever. I ask them where they feel it, because I'm trying to develop what we call interoception. So interoception is connected to proprioception. Proprioception is where's my body in space, and the big movements is what helps us orientate ourselves in space, which is why exercise is important. But interoception is the ability to recognize what I feel in my body without needing to name it. I'm angry, I'm this, I'm that. I mean, half the time the kids have feeling, I ask them, I don't know what I feel. In fact, I ask my wife what she feels. What's wrong? Nothing. Just on the phone to you. Hello, wifey. My wife's at you, so maybe your colleagues are watching. Anyway, so the important thing about it is that pause in between. The ability to recognize this is an input. What is happening? There's an output. So I'll say to them, how many of you feel something in your stomach? Me. Does your heart go faster? Yes. Does your breathing go shallower? Yes. How many of you got a lump in your throat? Oh, me. And how many of you get like a ringing in your ears? Now I'm talking to you, you all recognize these symptoms. It's that cascade of stress chemicals, which is called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And what that does is it switches off your thinking brain and you react. Okay. Now, what we want to teach them is that when your body tells you that, which is why we don't want them, based on the previous talk, to be distracted by their devices all the time, because we want them to recognize these things. And we want to say, okay, when that happens, I need to make a choice. Okay, and I can delay my reaction long enough to choose my response to the feeling. I don't want to kill the feeling. You're going to be angry. It is what it is. You're going to be heartbroken. In fact, like I said earlier, when you lose your first boyfriend or girlfriend, there's a time when you are so sad you want to die. Then there's a time that you're in so much pain. You wish you would die because it's so painful. Okay, and then you learn you can get through it, and you learn to have a rupture and repair. And our young people rupture all the time. We need to teach them how to repair. So we want their feelings to be functional, okay, and not reduce things to, they've been a moody teenager and they've got raging hormones. I've spoken to many endocrinologists and we've never been able to, under the microscope, sort of pinpoint a raging hormone. Then they need to have a sense of belonging and someone that sense of that soft place to land. And especially with teenagers, you are going to be that place sometimes, and other times you are not. And that's okay. Because a lot of parents, when their children, like when their children treat them as an ATM and they want to kiss their children, the child turns their head to the side because their parents' lips have got acid on them or they've got COVID or whatever the case is. It feels like a narcissistic wound. It feels like you've been wounded after all I've done for you, you ungrateful, whatever. It feels sore. Okay? But if we've raised them well, they will leave us. That's their job. It's our job. Okay. And that's what they're getting ready to do. So you must understand that those two things constantly interplay with one another. Okay, and there's a constant push. But remember yourselves as teenagers. Okay, the most important thing is when they come back for the repair, we must be there. That's the important thing. We are the containers, so that when the milk is spilled all over and they've made cut, I can deal with anything except my children being dead, literally. And there may be consequences for their behavior, but I can deal with it. Okay. And then obviously friends, we've got online and offline, and the concept of online friends, you need to have a discussion with them about, because I will talk about it shortly. But the risks online of online friends, as I mentioned in the previous talk, is enormous. Okay, because you can get into some really bad peer groups online doing really, really chaotic stuff. And because of the lack of prosody and the lack of body language and the idea that this is a movie. Kids, I mean, I've had kids come to refer to me because they've done some bizarre stuff online. I say, if you were in the world, would you have done, are you mad? You know, but they get on. Okay, so like, for example, I've got like about 4,500 followers online or whatever. And I said to the kids, you know, if I had 4,500 people following me out of my house when I woke up this morning, I'd actually be quite afraid. So the rules are all different. And what's happened is we haven't learned the etiquette of being online. Okay, we teach children the rules and morals and values and the ethics of being in the world and the school and the country and your religion and your house and your whatever. But there's none of that online. For example, you know, if I was, when I was a child and we had those phones, you put your phone, you see they've released a cell phone now that you dial. True story. Put your finger, you've got to dial the number. Fascinating. Just like a retro thing, fun. Anyway, if someone phoned my house after 8 o'clock, someone better be dead. Okay? And if someone phoned us during supper time, someone better be on fire and I have to put them out now. We just ignored the phone when they phoned at that time. And we've got to learn as adults to do the same. Never mind tell our children not to do it. We've got to not. I mean, there's an app called Dinner Time. It's the most ridiculous thing. You've got to put it on you've got to all put it on your phone so that your phone switches off all simultaneously, so you can have dinner without your phone. Switch your own phone off. You need an app to switch your phone. So ultimately what we're saying about any risk taking is we've got to get the balance right. Okay, so the whole thing around risk taking is about balance because it's inevitable. And which I'll do shortly is that we must understand that the chemical balances in teenagers are out, so they're naturally higher risk factors. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. So I'm not going to do this in any detail because I did in the previous talk, but just understand very simply, teenage brain is pruning, getting ready for adulthood, ready to leave home. It's Ferrari without a brake because it's also myelinating, it's becoming faster. The prefrontal cortex only develops by about 25, and that's what we call sort of late adolescence or emerging adulthood, and there's no way to brake. So the brain grows from back to front. Here, your impulses, here's the brakes, they don't have brakes. Plus they sped up. Okay, and essentially their decision making is based on emotions and they work from the inside out. They feel the stuff on the inside and act all over the world because there's this intensity which is, I find amazing, but can be quite tiring. Okay, next one. Okay, so is it easy to understand your brain and body when you are a teenager? Think back to yourselves. I thought I was being tortured to death by some external force that was sent out just to pick on me. I promise you, it was the most terrible thing. This existential crisis, I thought, why are you coming to get me? What's going on here? You know what I mean? So you got hormones and acne. So this is, sorry, this is a woman, but men have issues. I'm fine, I hate you, I love you, I want to ask you, come here, get away, orange juice. So there's all of these things going on sort of simultaneously in the brain. And what we're trying to do is, if you think of skeins of wool, if you take balls of wool, if you think of them and you take it, and like my daughter's now got a puppy, getting ready to have the baby, so she's looking after the puppy now. So my wife's there knitting, puppy gets the knitting's right throughout the house and garden. Now you've got to untangle the knitting, untangle so that you can knit. Impossible. Okay, we've got to think of the reorganizing brain as similar. These young people are being born into a new body. Go back to my previous talk. In COVID, they are actually literally coming out of COVID in a different body with the same set of social and emotional skills, but in an entirely different body. Okay, and what's happened is all of those wires are like that skein of wool. So what we're doing is assisting them to digest it and organize it. And in that, they're developing identity, they're developing belonging, and they're trying stuff, and that's where the risk comes from. Okay, next. Right. So this is the biggie, okay, is the majority of risk-taking behavior is some form of seeking. Okay, so the human brain is a seeking brain by nature, hence travel all over the world and find new stuff, try plants. I don't know how people worked out some stuff was edible and not, because some of it tastes terrible, but it's edible. Why did you eat that thing at some point? And it's a proper risk, you know what I mean? So we naturally like that. And we explore and we want to do things, and the teenage brain is trying to organize and say, where do I fit, who am I, etc. And it's a bit of self-reflection, which unfortunately they don't do enough of. So them sitting and thinking about themselves, they don't do enough. They're doing far more of that. And that's what worries me, is if they're not thinking their own thoughts, they are getting this kind of post-truth era scenario of the world getting fed to them by the machine. And all they're doing is basically repeating the thoughts of other people that make them feel comfortable. So we have grown up with a very strange group of children. Okay, very strange. They are offended by everything. Okay, but can say the most offensive things about other people without any thought of the effect it has on another person. It is the most bizarre thing. Okay, and they have properly confused freedom of speech with a compulsion to have an opinion about absolutely everything. Okay, without being informed or listening and observing until you can formulate an opinion. Okay, and that's because of this thing here. Okay, they're getting fed this. How many of you watched the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial at any level? Okay. Now, if you looked at that, and our children watching it, we went from the Me Too movement, men are bad, men are trash, and women are saying good things. Then you went to something in between, and then you went to Johnny Depp. Now, if you just, no, I'm telling you, it's a true story. So this is about gender roles. For example, when, girls get their ponytails pulled by boys in a playground, they go and say, the boy pulled my hair. Oh, it must be because he likes you. That kind of nonsense. But what happened in the Johnny Depp Amber Heard thing is that it created a very skewed thing around very complex issues like gender and relationships, because it became a binary, myopic kind of view of the world. So if you watched it on TikTok, there was a particular narrative. If you watched it on YouTube, slightly more balanced, but still a particular narrative. If you watched it on Sky News, very different. CNN, slightly different. Okay. The majority of children watched it in short clips of narratives on 30 seconds on TikTok. If you just looked at the clickbait, it was always Amber Heard with a contorted face and Johnny Depp looking suave. Every one of them with a little snippet out of the testimony which sinks Amber Heard. So what they did is they created, and the risk here is that in a world full of gender-based violence and risks of sexual assault and the pornographic script and all of these other complicated things, we got to a point where things like substance abuse, bad behavior by men, men say bad things in messages about their wives, having started or joining a band called the Hollywood Vampires that no one even knows why it's the Hollywood Vampires, and it's actually the Hollywood Vampires because they've survived massive amounts of drug abuse and other people have died, and that's why they're called the vampires, because they've survived. yes, of drug and alcohol abuse, and that's why they're the vampires. So even that is like a thing. But these people are kind of holy and almost untouchable. Okay. And you get this very, very distorted picture of gender relations. So we get at the end and say, oh, Johnny Depp has won. Now, the most bizarre thing about this, what did he win? He won a very technical legal argument that anybody I talk to who's young has no idea what the legal argument actually was, because they never read the original op-ed that led to the lawsuit, and they don't even know what you said in the op-ed and why the op-ed was an issue, but he won. Now, if I was him and I'd sent messages about my wife in a drunken stupor behave like that, I would be so embarrassed. I'd put my head in a hole and hang my head in shame as a man. Okay. And I would get serious help for my substance abuse problem because I'd behave like a pig. But you can excuse it because they're famous. And that's where we've got to be very careful in terms of the risk of you can do anything and get away with it if you've got money. And I'm seeing a lot of this at the moment. I get schools phone me about very complex cases. And I say, no, this is what you must do. We need to help both kids and whatever. No, the father's come with his lawyer, so we must let the child back. I said, but tell the lawyer to phone me. I grew up in the South. You can't many bang praat, you moet by bang moer. Don't come straight to me with your lawyer. Tell your lawyer to phone me. I want to talk to your lawyer so we can have a conversation about how to provide services to children as opposed to get them out of trouble because you got money. You know, what kind of world is this? When you're mad, you know? So that's a big risk online. And in the privileged world is this become very litigious, and the risk to it is children take no responsibility for their own behavior. It's part of behaving as you please, and you become the unimprisonable cost. There's no consequence because you can get out of it because you've got money. A big issue. Okay. All right, and then I've mentioned that really what I'm trying to get young people is to say, I'm okay enough now while I'm working out who I'm going to be. My body is the body positivity movement. I'm a big believer in. I do believe that there's been a backlash to the body positivity movement, and people string me up for saying it. There's certain things that are unhealthy. Okay, so we can't allow children to be unhealthy while their bodies are developing. Okay. So, you know, venerating kind of the size zero heroin chic model because you like that. I don't have an issue with it, but as long as you're healthy, you know, you can't starve yourself to death to look like a size zero. I mean, it's not okay because your brain will be starved with nutrients. You know what I'm saying? So they've got to understand that. And I mean, I sometimes, as an adult man, still right in my eyes can think, geez, chick, I got no hair, my eyes are stuffed, with like gels, and I look at myself and I'm like a bit uncomfortable with myself in the world. But then I say, okay, well, but I'm okay, you know? So it's a normal thing, but that sense of being okay enough is a problem for them because they're constantly comparing themselves to some completely unattainable standard. Okay. Everybody is. And that's the problem, is it's become very superficial. So it's very, well, it's superficial. Okay, next slide. Okay. So what are we seeing in terms of our challenges? Okay. There's a very fine line between reason and rebellion in teenagers. Okay, so I try to be curious about why they're thinking what they're thinking, even if they've been rebellious. So my curiosity is, what is your behavior trying to tell me? That's my curiosity. Even if I find it very odd, I'm like, okay, cool. I was saying to the mom at the back, I was saying, you know, like, children will come to me and they think they can shock me, like I hate a girl years ago. I'd say, so like one of the things I do is I like talking to children about music because it's a natural medium for me. They tend to use it. So I say, so what music? I like Marilyn Manson. So she thinks she's going to shock me. I said, no, he's quite an interesting character, but I wonder why you're interested in like someone who chooses a name between like the most prolific or the most famous sort of mass killer of all time who never killed anybody with sort of this icon who was misused by the men around her. Why is that interesting for you? Like what? You know, and you kind of catch them a little bit off guard because they're trying to shock you. And I'm like, okay, well, you know, hit me as hard as you can. You know, you're not going to shock me. I want to know what this means to you. The content's not really. Like when the kids used to tell me to F off, you're not my father. That's when I worked in the children's home. I used to say to them, yeah. I said, I don't know what F off means. Go sit there think about what you're trying to say to me, because that's a generic statement. I'm not quite sure what you're trying to say. Are you cross? Are you upset? Are you frustrated? What's wrong? Sit down, think about what you're actually trying to say, because I don't F off is too generic. I don't know. Okay. So the biggest danger that you are facing and the risk of the children is that they want to be pretty, they want to be liked, they want to be buff, they want to be whatever. So what they're doing is they are putting things online, and you must understand that we've warned you over many years about people grooming your children. Understand this. The entire internet is grooming your children. The whole internet. Okay. How come? You look at the average child, do they look and present themselves as the age they are in general? Okay. They present themselves as, and quite overtly sexual. Okay, there's a very sexualized kind of world on the internet. All the clickbait online, even on YouTube, is a picture of a scantily clad person. You click on it, that person doesn't even appear in the YouTube video, you know what I mean? But it's the clickbait to get you in. Okay, and it's all because they know they're appealing to a very primal human thing, which is sexuality. So what we're seeing, I'll give you 2 examples of things I'm seeing that are very, very worrying. And they relate mainly to young people being asked for images. So when you are negotiating a relationship, there are levels of intimacy, there are levels of sexuality, and in those levels of intimacy, you kind of move along and holding hands, and then putting your arms around people, then kissing, then touching, etc., etc. And we have to talk to children about consent firstly. What does consent mean? The fact that you need to give consent throughout that process. Consent to one thing is not consent to another thing. You can make a plan online today and tomorrow change your mind, etc., etc. We need to have that conversation. We need to have another conversation on capacity. At what age can you be held responsible for your bad behavior? Because you've got boys asking girls for things. Now they've generated child pornography. They've asked them that, or they've sent pornography to girls, and those girls have gone and told them it's not a big trouble because they've sent pornography to children. Okay, that's a real thing. Okay, when they make it of themselves, it's becoming a real problem. So the general system that happens is, I'm sure you've heard of a thing called catfishing. So catfishing is very simply somebody you don't know who they're on the other side. So I know them. I say to kids, how do you know them? Now my friend knows them. I said, did you ask your friend where they know? No, they're their friend online. I said, do you know where they know them from? No, I don't know. Okay, because it's important that have lots of people following them. Okay, so essentially catfishing relies on a thing called a sock puppet. A sock puppet is it's literally, so here's the sock with eyes and the mouth. Here's the person actually running the account. He's 55. This is a 13-year-old girl. Okay, so that's a sock puppet. So you'll get girls saying to boys, for example, we're dating, especially under COVID, because now they would be dating in the real, but they can't because they lock up, so now they're doing all the stuff online and the boundaries are low. So I'll say, okay, well, send me a picture of your face. Now send me your abs. I have 18 ones, Dak for back and showing their abs. Now they want genitals. Now they've got their face, their abs, now they've got their whole body. Okay. Now the message comes like, oh, by the way, send me more of this. Otherwise, I'm going to share it, release it online. Okay. And they give you a list of what you must send. Otherwise, they'll share it. Now, that they're doing is they're asking you for a menu for what they're going to post on the porn site. They won't blackmail the children because the children don't have money. They will get more content from them so they can sell the content ad infinitum. So in other words, it's a constant income stream. Okay. So that is the problem. Okay. So that's the big internet problem. Where do they learn about this area of development? Largely from the internet. You ask any children now where they learn about sex and sexuality. They'll tell you the internet. Well, they'll tell me the internet. I might not tell it to you, but they'll say to me the internet. Okay. And if we do not provide an alternative script, we've got a problem. What's the problem with the pornographic script? What's the primary problem? It's not real. We all know these answers. What's the main problem? Aggression, relationship. We know all these answers. So that's called the Coolidge effect, and the boys have a real problem when I say, one day you're going to develop a serious erectile dysfunction called the Coolidge effect, and they're like, what? Yes, it is, because you've had so much novelty. When you're with one person, your wife can't arouse you anymore, but you just had too much novelty. That's a thing, okay? The biggest problem we must understand is that things like consent, capacity, none of it's negotiated in porn, because pornography is the consumption of another human being. That's what it is. So it's pure objectification, and it's about production and consumption. So there is no thought for the person who's there to just simply meet your needs. Okay, and they're there purely to meet your needs. That's what they do. Okay, and then that bleeds into other areas. Okay, so it just bleeds into a lack of empathy, lack of perspective taking, lack of asking about consent, believing that the script starts here, ends here, and I have a case a week of 14 and 15-year-old boys referred to me who are facing charges of rape a week. Okay. And this is not people that they didn't know who are opening the cases, people they know. Okay. The images of men and women and masculinity and femininity, there's been a very bad backlash. So with the empowerment of women, which has been a very, very good thing, there's been a backlash in masculinity. And for those of you with boy children, you've got to be very, very careful, because the backlash has been the men's rights movements. Now, the men's rights movements are largely white, Anglo-Saxon, Christian, European, American folk who have decided that women have taken over the world, so therefore we must take it back. And the red pill, blue pill, black pill, white pill movement. And I don't know if you've heard of the incels. So the incels are the involuntary celibates. So the involuntary celibates are sending around and they're recruiting men actively. And what they're doing is they're saying, right, these women of the world, it's been taken over by the matriarchs. They talk about the patriarchy. There's no such thing. The world's been taken over by women. And as a result, what's happened is we must take the world back. But we are involuntary celibates because women don't like us, because we don't have the right genes, we don't look the right way, and as a result, we'll never procreate. No one will ever have sex with us because we look a certain way. So therefore, the only way out is to kill everybody and ourselves. And they do. So under lockdown, there was a very famous case in the UK, and he actually had a rant online in the sense, and then he went up to and he shot all his neighbors and then himself. So you've got to understand that there's a pendulum. They called it in philosophy the Hegelian dialectic, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Okay, so there's this constant movement like this online, and a boy will find, I don't know where I fit, I don't know what it is to be a man, and they find this Tate, for example, online, who's a kickboxer and he was a reality star, and now he's got a brothel and he's got online cam girls, and now he's a hero because he's a gabillionaire and he's moved to Romania because there's no rules there. So no, and they follow these guys, and the problem is they all tell devil's truths, all of them. They all tell half-truths. And the half-truths is that, is it difficult to find your identity as a man at the moment? The answer is yes, it is. And we can't deny that. It is what it is, okay? And as a white man, even more complicated, okay? So we have to just acknowledge these things so we can have conversations about them, because these other people control the narratives, and the narratives are ugly, okay? And that's what our boys are exposed to largely. And then competitiveness, which I did in the previous talk. So there's a massive competitiveness within the gender, because get into the right school, get the right marks, be the captain of the right team, get into the right high school, the right hostel, the right university, the right secret society, the right job, access to endless privilege. That's a system. And in that system is built competitiveness and secrecy, okay, which leads to a lot of quite deviant, but socially sanctioned deviant stuff, okay? And that's kind of stuff we need to have a conversation about. The vast majority of the girls I see have been smashed by their peers. They have been broken down to the point where they just don't even know who or what they are. Because remember, in your adolescent years, you've been reflected back to yourself by your peer group, and that's online and offline. And if you do some of that, they like. If you do some of that, they don't. You post that, they like it, you don't delete it. You post that, no one responds, you delete that. They don't like you, you cancel them. You don't like somebody else's thing, you call them out, you get cancelled. It's a very complicated thing, okay? And it's a constant feedback loop. that is creating some really complicated identity challenges in young people, where it's the internal turmoil, because the other things you can't turn it off. So it goes home with you, it's in your notifications all the time. I say to the girls, I say, listen to me, why don't you switch your phone off at 3 in the morning when you were being harassed like this? No, another question, why won't you sleep at 3 o'clock in the morning? Okay, no, if I switch the phone off, they're all going to get ahead of me, and I wake up the next morning, then they've slaughtered me. I have to get ahead of it. Okay, so it's, and I mean, I saw a conversation, a bullying conversation, which was actually an harassment conversation. I saw that conversation go right through the night. Woke up the next day, neither of them had slept. Next slide. All right, so here we go. Listen to me carefully. And if you're going to hear nothing from me today, listen to this slide very carefully. I've warned you in the previous talk and in this talk about the input from the machine to your children. Okay, I've spoken to you about food, I've spoken to you about exercise, helping your children process their feelings, despite their protests, etc. Now, in the previous talk, I mentioned to you that there was a Guardian article that was saying that this young girl would not have had a successful suicide had she not been online. In other words, she would actually have survived it, because that's what the coroner found. In the same, so no, this was today, so in the same news bulletin, but a day later. What's today? Tuesday? Monday. So it must have been Sunday. Sunday was the article in the Guardian. Today was the next article. The substance use disorders have increased by 75% in our youth, to the point where it's like 1 in 3. Now, that's a scary, scary, scary statistic. Okay. Now, substance use disorder is a continuum. So you go from a continuum of using something, then using it and there's negative consequences, but you still use it. Then you become really hectic, where you choose that one thing over everything else. Okay. Activities, your relationship with your parents, money, etc. So it's a continuum. So they're talking about the whole continuum. And what we have done is we have become lax. Why have we become lax? Much like the machine has marketed itself to our children as kind of where and how to live and how to be influenced, whatever, we have said things like, at least my child is vaping, they're not smoking. Vaping is less. I've had coaches in schools. I'm doing a talk on vaping at school. The school's got a terrible vaping problem, not the school. The school's got a terrible vaping problem. So I say, boy puts his hand up. No, but my coach said to me, he's my swimming coach, he said to me that if I vape, it helps with my lung capacity because I'm breathing deeply and there's like water in it and I'm swimming and whatever. I said, really? Send me that coach. Okay. So other thing we have done is we haven't fought back hard enough against the marketing companies who are turning something that was inherently difficult to do, like smoking, like smoke a head rush, fall over, cough your lungs out. Those of us who smoked want to die, think you're going to vomit because the nicotine's gone straight to your head, and then you carry on. None of us know why. But what happens is that they then start marketing in a way that's palatable to children. Watermelon flavor in a little thing, makes bubbly smoke, not even smoke, it's like vapor. And it's now smells like and tastes like watermelon because it's now palatable. And they know that to get a teenager hooked now, because the teenage brain is prone to addiction, get a teenage hooked now, they're your customer for life. And all that device is, all that vape is a device to put something into your child. Okay. So what did this article say? It said there's been a very strange shift in the trend. Originally, this massive substance abuse problem was associated with children needing to lower inhibitions, like probably none of you did because you're from the north, I'm from the south, so we did where we used alcohol and things to have a party. So like, for example, as you can see, I'm a relatively inbred white sort of South African male, which means I have no culture whatsoever. And as a result, when my rite of passage, going from being a child to an adult, was my 21st birthday, I got a key, which I always had. And then to show that I was a man, I had to do some performative exercise, which was drink some concoction of lots and lots of alcohol without getting sick and falling over, as did every other person in my environment. Okay, this is the way it was. Okay, so alcohol then becomes more palatable because now we're making that into watermelon flavor, and you've got to even taste the alcohol in it anymore. So what they're doing is these companies are priming our children to get them hooked now and make it palatable. And we've fallen into a very, very funny psychological defense. As long as they're doing it in my house, is the one thing I hear constantly. I know what my children are doing under my roof, therefore it's okay. You know, at least he's just having 15% non-salt nicotine vape. He's not at 45% salted nicotine vape. Let's understand, with the vapes, you're getting additives, you're getting Dutchies, Skellies, Canna, THC, CBD, etc., etc. The device is simply an ingestion mechanism. So what you put in the device, that makes the difference. Okay? And none of it is benign. So what this article said that I see, and what really scared me, is it's not for partying anymore. It's to cope with life. Now that shouldn't be. That our children have to disappear into a device to find their place of being, and they need to self-medicate in order to feel that this world is palatable, is diabolical. And we cannot stand by and watch it happen. Okay, so let me take an example of, let's take this one. So I've got a client at the moment who broke his brain under lockdown. So he was inherently a gamer, youngest child in the family, everyone's older, everybody's partying, left him to his own devices, playing far too much Grand Theft Auto, Call of Duty. He's like 10 or 11, 9, 8, 7, 5, playing all these age-restricted games. That was the start of the problem. Because that slippery slope, you cannot come back from. Suddenly you allow your 12-year-old to play 18 age-restricted games while they're not drinking. Same thing. And they'll tell you it's the same thing. Okay, because you let it happen. So now he has a couple of drinks, because now he's going to be 16. Now he has a couple of drinks and he's playing these machines. Now cannabis becomes legal. Now please listen to me very carefully. Cannabis is not legal. It is decriminalized, and there is a vast difference between the two. Okay. Decriminalization means they made it not a crime. Legalization means they regulated it. They did no such thing. Children are not allowed to smoke cannabis. Cannabis breaks teenagers' brains. Okay, it breaks them. The endocannabinoid system, and it's interesting that they don't get taught it at varsity, you know, in neuroscience we get taught it, but the endocannabinoid system is a system that regulates the majority of your functioning. It's part of your massive hormonal endocrine system. You've got a CBD section, you've got a THC section, you've got what's called an anandamide, which is a thing that, like I said earlier, it's a chemical that, and ananda is from ananda, which is bliss. It's called the bliss molecule from Vedic literature. So it's the bliss molecule is what you get when you run. Actually, anandamide, it's not the opioids, it's actually the bliss molecule. It's the runner's high. Now, what happens is that system knows very nicely where to connect and what to do when it needs to do it. When you smoke it, you allow it to come in very quickly and you flood that system. So the cannabis use disorders have rocketed through the roof. The amount of cannabis use disorders I see, I've never seen as many in my life. And I can't fight with them because they keep telling me it's legal. I tell them it's not legal. Yes, it is. And you must argue with the teenagers, like arguing with a toddler. No. Yes, it is. No, yes, it's no. So what I try and do is I try and educate them on other ways to activate that system in a more balanced way, which is the first policy. But there is nothing beneficial in vaping, drinking, cannabis, etc., for teenagers. It is certainly not benign. Okay? It's causing serious problems. Okay, and it reduces self-regulation. So for me, it's a sign And when we look at these signs of this high risk taking behavior and what they're putting into themselves, is they're telling me I can't regulate myself. I need something put in from the outside to help me regulate because I'm out of my skin and I don't know what to do. So we need to help them with that set of skills. And it's not been on the device. Okay. So we have got to fight back against this because this is all natural stuff that these guys, these scientists know about. Did any of you watch? I think I keep getting confused between the outside and the inside. The outside is me. The inside, I always say to people, I'm a bit like cooking with fennel. I'm an acquired taste, you know. So I think it's called the inside, where that one chemist from the tobacco industry broke ranks and said how they actually set up the addictions of nicotine, which led to the first class action suit. Okay. Now, what you've got to think about is go back and think, what are they promoting CBD and that for now? Mainly. So pain is a big one. Stress. Memory. Everything. Okay. Largely promoted. Certainly the decriminalization of it in court was promoted as a painkiller, certainly in the last stages of cancer. Even when I had my neck op, they gave it to me. It made me mal. I promise you, mental. I've never smoked. Well, I tried cannabis, but I've never smoked. It's something I don't like. It makes me so paranoid, I want to die. I've got the wrong genes for cannabis. And there's another gene in cannabis that if you have that particular gene, it can make you psychotic. You'll never come back from it. It's a gene. You don't know what you're playing with because that stuff that you take is not regulated at any level. Then you look at the funny thing that happens is we're now all arguing about, oh, look what they've done in the world of the opioids. You know, this opioid addiction, now we're into the opioid, but now we must replace it with cannabis. We will have the same problem. The people selling cannabis oil are cooking it in their houses, okay, in their ovens. Cannot get the THC out. The THC is the problem. And only the very clever chemical companies, the Adcock Ingrams and that, if they say CBD like a paracetamol, then you can be sure it's CBD. Anybody else, we have no idea. Okay, it's a completely unregulated world. And the other one that's unregulated is supplements. Okay, children should not be taking supplements. They should be eating properly. Okay, I've got to go in gym, bunny, don't take supplements, eat lots of rice, eat some fuka. And by the way, your children need carbs. Just by the way. Children need carbs, part of their brain. If you're going to go keto, you replace the child's you replace their energy mechanism in their brain with fat. Okay, that's what's called a ketogenic diet. Ketosis is we put children into ketosis, especially when they're epileptic. So we change the source of energy in their brain so they don't have as many seizures, but it's a discipline that you cannot believe. Because getting that fat right is a proper discipline. Children need carbs. Okay, so be careful of all this faddy stuff. You know, go back to basics. In conclusion, last slide. This is a framework for thought. Okay. Teenagers are not defective. Okay. They're wonderful beings. They have an emotional spark, like a first love. They love social engagement. Let's use that as a positive peer culture. Let's make kindness cool. Let's make the parties where we don't all get smashed out of our heads cool. They love novelty. Their dopamine is lowered. Okay, they naturally have lower dopamine, which is why they take higher risks. As a result, we must recognize there's risk and reward. So help them take risks that raise the dopamine, that make them feel good without the constant ticking on the machine, because we live in the dopamine age. Give them other ways to try and do that. They love creative exploration and they push against the status quo. We should be proud that we have raised people that can question us because we're that's right. Okay, and finally, they need to be able to be seen and they need to feel felt by you despite their protest. They need to be soothed, which means that when there's a rupture, they need to have a safe place to return to a container. They need to be safe, okay? And ultimately, you need to be regulated. Because if you cannot co-regulate, your children find it impossible to regulate. Okay, So the biggest thing you need to think about in yourself is the greatest gift you can give your children is your own happiness. Thank you.
A very big thank you for your time and your insights, and thank you to all of you at home and here tonight. It's impossible to sum up your wealth of knowledge, and I think that's just in short, what you said at the end is key, and that's why we're all here today. So we are a system to these children, parents, teachers, our headmistresses, therapists, house mistresses, peer mentors. There are so many. We're all here. So parents, we rely on you. You really rely on us, and let's be a team and continue these conversations. And Luke, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Okay.